The cruelest doors are never slammed by strangers, but by the people who once called you family. The rain had already soaked through Naomi Carter's sweater by the time the front doors opened again. Midnight in Connecticut carried a cold that settled into the bones, and the marble steps beneath her shoes glistened under the pale chandelier lights spilling from the mansion behind her. One of the twins stirred softly against her chest, wrapped in a faded cream blanket that was still warm from the nursery upstairs. The other slept in the carrier hanging from her shoulder, too young to understand the sound of raised voices echoing through the Whitmore estate. Naomi stood there silently, while two house staff members placed her suitcases beside the fountain without looking her in the eye. They looked embarrassed. Not cruel, just obedient. Inside the mansion, music still floated through the halls from Vivian Whitmore's dinner party. Crystal glasses clinked somewhere deeper inside. A piano played softly. The world kept moving as if a woman and her newborn twins were not being erased from it in real time. "You need to leave now," Vivian said calmly from the doorway, one hand resting against the gold frame as though she owned the night itself. Her silk gown shimmered beneath the lights, not a single strand of silver hair out of place. "At this hour?" Naomi asked quietly, adjusting the blanket around the baby's tiny hand. Her voice barely rose above the rain. Vivian's expression never changed, especially at this hour. Naomi looked past her toward the staircase inside the mansion. Ethan stood there, half hidden in shadow, one hand gripping the railing. He looked exhausted, weak, the kind of weak that wore expensive watches and stayed silent when it mattered most. For a moment, Naomi thought he might finally speak, might finally walk down those stairs and tell his mother to stop. Instead, he lowered his eyes. That hurt more than anything else. The younger twin began to cry softly, the tiny sound swallowed by thunder rolling across the distant hills. Naomi gently rocked the baby against her chest. 6 days old. They were only 6 days old. Vivian folded her arms. "You should have understood your place from the beginning. Ethan was always going to outgrow this mistake." Naomi stared at her for a long second. Not angry, not pleading, just tired in a way only mothers understood. The front door behind Vivian began closing slowly, inch by inch, warm light narrowing across the wet stone floor. Naomi finally bent down to grab one of the bags when something caught her eye beside the entrance. Mounted into the wall near the iron gate stood a small bronze plaque most guests never noticed. Rainwater slid across its polished surface. Naomi's gaze lingered there for only a second. 3 engraved words beneath the Whitmore Trust crest. N. Carter. Vivian noticed her looking and immediately stepped forward, blocking the plaque with her body. "Don't embarrass yourself further," she said sharply. Naomi said nothing. She simply pulled the suitcase upright with one hand while balancing the sleeping twins against her chest. The rain became heavier. Somewhere down the empty road beyond the estate gates, headlights appeared through the darkness. Slow, black, expensive. Naomi watched the approaching vehicle without expression while the mansion doors finally shut behind her with a deep, echoing thud. And for the first time that night, Vivian Whitmore looked nervous. The black car rolled through the rain without a sound, its headlights cutting across the stone driveway like pale silver blades. Naomi tightened her grip on the twins as the vehicle stopped beside the estate gates. For a second, nobody moved. Rainwater dripped from the ends of her curls onto the baby blanket wrapped around her daughter. Her fingers felt numb from the cold, but she kept rocking the infant gently against her chest while staring at the tinted window beside her. Then the rear door opened. An older man stepped out holding a dark umbrella. His gray coat looked expensive but worn with age, and his polished shoes splashed lightly against the wet pavement as he approached her. Naomi recognized him immediately. Jonathan Hale, the Whitmore family attorney. He had worked for Ethan's grandfather for more than 30 years, and unlike everyone else inside that mansion, he never looked at Naomi as though she needed permission to exist. Jonathan glanced toward the brightly lit windows of the estate before lowering his eyes to the sleeping twins. "They should not be outside in weather like this," he said quietly. Naomi forced a tired smile. Apparently, the family disagrees. Behind the iron gates, the silhouette of Vivian Whitmore remained frozen near the entrance. Watching, waiting. Jonathan noticed her too. His jaw tightened for only a second before he opened the umbrella over Naomi and the babies. "Come with me," he said. Naomi did not move immediately. Her eyes drifted back, toward the mansion, toward the staircase behind the tall windows. Ethan was still there. She could barely make out his figure through the rain-streaked glass, standing exactly where she left him. Motionless, like a man trapped inside his own cowardice. The sight pulled something old and painful through her chest. Because there was a time Ethan Whitmore would have crossed oceans for her. Before the money, before the parties, before his mother began whispering into every silence between them. Naomi still remembered the tiny apartment they once shared in New Haven when Ethan had nothing except debt, ambition, and 2 wrinkled dress shirts hanging beside the stove. She used to wake up at 4:30 every morning to work double shifts at the diner, while Ethan built presentations for investors on a laptop that overheated every 20 minutes. In winter, she taped cardboard against the apartment windows to stop the freezing draft from coming inside. She paid for his first business trip with tip money she kept hidden inside a coffee can above the refrigerator. Back then, Ethan used to kiss her forehead and say, "One day, I am going to give you everything." Naomi never asked for everything. She only wanted loyalty. But wealth changed the rhythm of the Whitmore family. Success arrived fast. New York offices, magazine interviews, charity galas beneath chandeliers the size of cars. Then came Vivian. Quiet at first, polite in public, cruel in private. Naomi remembered the first time Vivian visited their penthouse after Ethan's company exploded in value. The older woman walked slowly through every room wearing white gloves, touching furniture like an inspector searching for dirt. Then her eyes landed on Naomi's framed family photo sitting near the fireplace. "Interesting choice," Vivian had said softly. "You kept your maiden name." Naomi smiled politely. "Because it is still my name." Vivian returned the photo to the table with cold precision. "Women like you always keep one foot near the exit." Outside the mansion gates, thunder rolled again across the dark Connecticut hills. Jonathan reached down and lifted Naomi's suitcase into the waiting car. "There are things you do not know yet," he said carefully. Naomi looked at him. "About what?" Jonathan hesitated. For the first time that night, the older man seemed uncertain. Then his eyes shifted briefly toward the bronze plaque beside the gate before returning to her face. "About why your name is still on that house." Naomi sat quietly in the back seat while the rain slid across the windows in silver streaks, turning the empty Connecticut roads into blurred rivers of light. The twins slept against her chest now, wrapped carefully inside Jonathan Hale's wool coat. The warmth of the fabric still carried traces of cedar and old paper, the kind of scent that reminded Naomi of libraries and quiet offices where powerful decisions were made behind closed doors. Neither of the babies cried anymore. Exhaustion had finally pulled them into sleep. Jonathan drove without music. One hand rested calmly against the steering wheel while city lights reflected faintly across his glasses. Outside, the Whitmore estate disappeared farther into the darkness with every mile. Naomi kept staring ahead anyway. "You knew," she finally said softly. Jonathan did not pretend to misunderstand her. "About tonight?" Naomi nodded once. "About all of it." The older man exhaled slowly. "I knew Vivian was planning something after the twins were born. I did not know she would do it this way." Naomi lowered her eyes toward the tiny knit hat covering her son's head. 6 days old. He had not even learned the sound of her heartbeat outside the womb before being thrown into a storm he could not understand. Jonathan glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "I am sorry, Naomi." She looked out the window again. "You are not the one who stayed silent." The car became quiet after that. Downtown Hartford appeared nearly empty at this hour, the sidewalks slick with rain beneath glowing traffic lights. A few late-night diners still flickered with neon signs, while steam rose from sewer grates into the cold air. Jonathan eventually pulled beneath the awning of an older brick apartment building near the riverfront. It was not luxurious, but it was warm, safe, real. Naomi stepped out carefully while Jonathan carried her suitcases inside. The lobby smelled faintly of radiator heat and old wood polish. Somewhere upstairs, a television played softly through thin walls. It felt strangely comforting after years inside rooms so large they echoed. Jonathan opened the apartment door and switched on the lights. Small kitchen, narrow hallway, one couch near the window. Modest, quiet. Naomi walked inside slowly, holding the twins close while the floor creaked beneath her shoes. For the first time that night, her shoulders finally relaxed. Jonathan set the luggage beside the door before reaching into the inside pocket of his coat. "There is something I need you to keep," he said. Naomi looked up. He placed a small brass key into her palm. Old-fashioned. Heavy. Its edges worn smooth with time. Naomi frowned slightly. "What is this?" Jonathan studied the key for a long moment before answering. "Your husband's grandfather gave it to me 3 years ago." Naomi's expression tightened with confusion. "Why would he give me a key?" Jonathan's voice lowered. "Because Arthur Whitmore trusted you more than anyone in that family." Naomi stared at him in silence. Arthur Whitmore had been the only person inside that mansion who ever treated her with genuine warmth. While Vivian measured worth through last names and dinner invitations, Arthur used to sit beside Naomi in the kitchen at 2 in the morning drinking black coffee from chipped ceramic mugs. He once told her rich people spent too much money trying to look important and not enough time becoming decent. Jonathan slowly removed a folded envelope from his briefcase. Next, thick cream paper. Arthur Whitmore's initials pressed into dark blue wax. Naomi's breath caught slightly. "He left instructions," Jonathan said carefully. "Very specific instructions." Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while Naomi stared at the envelope in her hands. Then Jonathan said the one sentence that made the entire night suddenly feel different. "Naomi, the Whitmore mansion was never fully theirs to begin with." The apartment windows rattled softly as another wave of rain swept across Hartford before dawn. Naomi sat alone at the small kitchen table while the twins slept beside her in borrowed bassinets Jonathan had quietly arranged overnight. The room smelled faintly of baby powder, radiator heat, and fresh coffee cooling untouched near her elbow. She had not slept at all. Arthur Whitmore's sealed letter rested in front of her beneath the yellow glow of the kitchen light. The dark blue wax seal remained unbroken. Naomi stared at it for nearly an hour before finally sliding one finger beneath the fold. The paper inside crackled softly as she opened it. Arthur's handwriting appeared steady despite the shakiness age had placed into his hands during his final years. Naomi could almost hear his voice while reading the first line. "If you are reading this, then the family has already failed you." Her throat tightened instantly. Outside, headlights passed across the wet street below. Somewhere in the building, pipes groaned awake for the morning. Naomi kept reading. Arthur wrote about loneliness more than money, about watching wealth turn people cold, about Ethan becoming weaker every year beneath Vivian's control. But one sentence made Naomi stop breathing for a moment. "A home belongs to the person who protects it, not the people who inherited its name." Naomi lowered the letter slowly. Her eyes drifted toward the sleeping twins beside the couch. Tiny fingers, tiny breaths, tiny lives depending entirely on her strength now. Jonathan had been right. The mansion never truly belonged to Vivian. Arthur explained everything in careful detail. Years earlier, after Ethan's father died, the Whitmore estate had been transferred into a protected trust. Most of the family believed ownership would eventually pass fully to Ethan after Arthur's death. But Arthur changed the trust quietly after Naomi entered the family. He never trusted Vivian with permanent control of the estate. Not after seeing the way she treated employees, relatives, even Ethan himself. Arthur wrote that Naomi brought peace into the house for the first time in decades. She cooked in the kitchen with staff members instead of demanding service. She remembered birthdays. She sat beside him during chemotherapy appointments when everyone else claimed to be busy. "You made that cold house feel human again," the letter read. Naomi covered her mouth as emotion rose unexpectedly into her chest. Because nobody had ever defended her that way before, especially not inside the Whitmore family. Then she reached the final paragraph. Her eyes narrowed slowly while reading each word twice. The bronze plaque by the front gate was installed after the trust amendment became legally binding. Vivian never removed it because doing so would acknowledge what she spent years trying to hide. Naomi immediately remembered the rain sliding across the plaque that night. N. Carter. She thought exhaustion had distorted her vision, but it had been real the entire time. Her name had never disappeared from that property. A soft cry suddenly came from the bassinet beside the couch. Naomi stood quickly and lifted her daughter into her arms, gently rocking her against her shoulder while morning light slowly began creeping through the apartment windows. The storm outside had finally started fading. Naomi walked toward the window while holding the baby close. Down below, the city was waking up. delivery trucks, coffee carts, exhaust smoke rising into the pale blue dawn. Ordinary people beginning ordinary mornings. For the first time since leaving the mansion, Naomi no longer felt abandoned. Hurt, yes. Exhausted, absolutely. But not powerless. Her daughter slowly stopped crying as Naomi kissed the top of her tiny forehead. Then Naomi looked down at the brass key resting on the kitchen counter beside Arthur's letter. Cold metal, worn edges, waiting, and somewhere 60 miles away, inside a mansion filled with marble floors and expensive lies, Vivian Whitmore still had no idea she had thrown the rightful owner out into the rain. 3 weeks passed before Naomi finally returned to the Whitmore estate. Not as a wife, not as a guest, and certainly not as someone begging to be accepted again. She came back because Jonathan Hale asked her to witness something important. The sky above Connecticut carried the pale gray color of approaching winter when Jonathan's car rolled through the front gates that afternoon. Naomi sat silently in the passenger seat while the twins slept side by side in the back, bundled inside matching cream-colored blankets. The babies had grown slightly heavier already. Tiny changes only a mother would notice. The mansion appeared exactly the same as the night she left it. Tall stone columns, black iron lanterns glowing beside the entrance, perfectly trimmed hedges untouched by weather or consequence. But Naomi noticed something different immediately. The bronze plaque near the gate was gone. Jonathan noticed her expression. Vivian had it removed the morning after you left, he said calmly. Naomi looked away toward the long marble staircase leading up to the entrance. Of course she did. Inside the mansion, staff members moved quietly through the halls preparing for another charity event scheduled later that week. Crystal trays clinked softly. Fresh flowers filled the air with the scent of roses and eucalyptus. Naomi remembered arranging those same flowers herself once, laughing with kitchen staff, while Vivian complained about seating charts upstairs. Strange how quickly people could pretend history never happened. Jonathan guided her toward Arthur Whitmore's old private study near the east wing. The room remained untouched since his death. Dark oak shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and the faint scent of old leather and cigar smoke still lingered in the air. Afternoon light spilled through tall windows onto the polished desk where Arthur once spent hours reading financial reports in complete silence. Naomi stopped near the fireplace. Her eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting beside a brass clock. Arthur stood smiling beside her at a summer garden party years ago. She had completely forgotten that picture existed. He kept that on his desk every day, Jonathan said softly. Naomi swallowed hard, but said nothing. Jonathan walked toward the bookshelf behind the desk and reached for a hidden brass latch Naomi had never noticed before. A quiet click echoed through the room. Then part of the wooden shelving shifted open slightly, revealing a narrow built-in safe behind it. Naomi stared in surprise while Jonathan entered the code carefully. The safe door swung open with a low metallic sound. Inside rested several legal folders, property records, and one small velvet box. Jonathan removed the top folder first and handed it to Naomi. Her hands tightened slightly as she opened the documents. Trust agreements, property transfers, signatures, dates. Every page confirmed what Arthur's letter had already revealed. The Whitmore estate had been legally protected under a trust tied directly to Naomi Carter years before Arthur died. Not Ethan. Not Vivian. Naomi. Arthur knew Vivian would try to control everything after he passed away. Jonathan explained quietly. So he built safeguards she could not touch. Naomi kept scanning the papers in disbelief. Then why did nobody tell me? Jonathan's expression darkened slightly. Because Arthur wanted the truth revealed only if the family betrayed you beyond repair. The room became still after that. Somewhere downstairs, silverware rattled faintly as staff prepared for dinner service. Naomi slowly closed the folder. So legally, Jonathan nodded once before she could finish. Legally, Vivian Whitmore has been living in your house. Naomi stared toward the tall study windows overlooking the estate grounds. Her reflection stared back faintly against the glass. Tired eyes. Simple coat. A woman who looked nothing like the owner of one of the wealthiest properties in Connecticut. Yet somehow, for the first time in years, she finally understood why Vivian hated her so deeply. It was never only about status. Vivian had been terrified all along. The first snow of December arrived the same week Vivian Whitmore began planning the annual Whitmore Foundation Winter Gala. Every year, the event filled the mansion with politicians, investors, magazine photographers, and people wealthy enough to pretend kindness was a personality trait. Naomi remembered attending the gala once during her second year of marriage. Back then, she still believed effort could earn acceptance. She spent 6 hours helping kitchen staff prepare floral arrangements only for Vivian to introduce her to guests as Ethan's wife, without ever saying her name. Now, nearly 2 months after being thrown out of the mansion, Naomi stood inside a small laundromat 3 blocks from her apartment, folding baby clothes while snow drifted softly past the windows outside. One twin slept inside a stroller beside her. The other rested against her chest in a fabric carrier beneath her coat. The dryers hummed steadily around her, while local news played quietly from a television mounted in the corner. Naomi had learned to survive on routines now. Morning feedings, grocery lists, night shifts at a neighborhood cafe twice a week, while an elderly woman named Mrs. Delgado watched the babies downstairs. Her life had become smaller after the mansion. Simpler, but strangely more honest. Nobody in Hartford cared whether she belonged to a powerful family. Nobody measured her worth through invitations or last names. To the barista across the street, she was simply Naomi, the young mother who always ordered dark roast coffee and thanked people with genuine warmth. Still, some nights remained difficult, especially when the twins cried at the same time while bills stacked across the kitchen counter beside unopened legal folders from Jonathan Hale. Naomi had not touched the documents again since leaving Arthur's study, not because she feared the truth, but because part of her still struggled to understand how a woman sleeping in a one-bedroom apartment could somehow legally own one of the largest estates in Connecticut. Her phone vibrated softly inside her coat pocket. Naomi adjusted the baby against her chest before answering. Hello. Jonathan's familiar voice came through immediately. The gala is next Friday night. Naomi folded another tiny sweater carefully before speaking. I saw the invitations online. Vivian believes public appearances will calm investor concerns after your departure. Naomi let out a faint, humorless laugh. My departure? Jonathan paused briefly. There is more. Naomi stopped folding clothes. Something in his tone changed the air around her instantly. What happened? Vivian is finalizing plans to transfer partial estate control into Ethan's name during the gala presentation. Naomi frowned. Can she do that? No, Jonathan replied calmly. But she believes she can because she still assumes you will remain silent. Snow continued falling beyond the laundromat windows while Naomi stared at the spinning dryers beside her. Somewhere deep inside her chest, something quiet began shifting. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. Jonathan spoke again. Arthur anticipated this possibility before he died. Naomi lowered her voice. What are you asking me to do? There was a long pause before he answered. Come back to the mansion next Friday. Naomi looked down at her sleeping daughter, tiny eyelashes resting against soft brown skin. Peaceful, unaware of inheritance battles and family betrayals, and marble hallways filled with people who mistook cruelty for power. Jonathan, you do not need to fight anyone, he interrupted gently. You only need to walk through the front door. Naomi closed her eyes briefly as memories flooded back. The rain, the silence, Ethan standing motionless on the staircase while the doors closed behind her. Her fingers tightened around the phone. And if Vivian tries to humiliate me again? Jonathan's voice remained calm. Certain. This time, Naomi, she will be doing it inside your house. Snow covered the Whitmore estate the night Naomi returned. Soft white layers rested across the stone fountains, the iron gates, the long curved driveway where luxury cars lined up beneath glowing lanterns. Inside the mansion, the annual winter gala had already begun. Crystal chandeliers reflected gold light across polished marble floors, while violin music floated gently through crowded halls filled with tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns. Waiters moved between guests carrying champagne trays while photographers snapped pictures near the grand staircase. Everything looked flawless, expensive, controlled. Vivian Whitmore stood near the center of the ballroom, wearing silver silk and diamonds resting cold against her throat. She smiled for investors, laughed softly beside politicians, played the perfect hostess beneath the chandeliers she believed still belonged to her family. Ethan remained close beside her, distracted and distant in a dark navy tuxedo. He looked thinner than Naomi remembered, more tired. Success had aged him in strange ways. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the entrance, as if expecting something he could not explain. Then exactly at 8:37, the front doors opened. Cold winter air swept softly into the ballroom. Conversation slowed almost instantly. Naomi stepped inside alone. Black wool coat, elegant black dress beneath it. No diamonds, no dramatic entrance. Just quiet confidence moving through a room that once tried to erase her existence. Snowflakes melted slowly against the dark curls resting near her shoulders. The ballroom became unnaturally still. Some guests recognized her immediately. Others only sensed tension spreading across the room like invisible smoke. Ethan froze beside the staircase the moment he saw her. For one brief second, something raw crossed his face. Regret. Naomi noticed it immediately, but it no longer moved her the way it once would have. Vivian recovered first. Of course she did. Her smile returned carefully as she crossed the ballroom floor toward Naomi with slow, measured steps. Well, Vivian said smoothly enough for nearby guests to overhear. This is unexpected. Naomi removed her gloves calmly. Good evening, Vivian. Several people exchanged awkward glances nearby. The tension beneath Vivian's smile sharpened slightly. I assumed you would have more dignity than to appear uninvited. Naomi met her eyes without blinking. Interesting choice of words. Ethan finally stepped forward then, voice quieter than before. Naomi. Hearing her name in his voice again felt strange now. Familiar, but distant. Like hearing music from a house she no longer lived inside. Naomi looked at him briefly. He still wore the expensive watch she bought him years ago after his first successful business deal. She remembered saving for months to afford it. Funny how memories attach themselves to small objects. Ethan swallowed hard. The twins, are they okay? Naomi nodded once. They are safe. Vivian interrupted before he could speak again. You should leave before this becomes embarrassing for everyone. Naomi glanced slowly around the ballroom. Investors, board members, socialites pretending not to listen while absolutely listening to everything. Then her eyes returned calmly to Vivian. Embarrassing for who? The older woman's composure flickered for the first time all evening. Just slightly. But Naomi saw it. So did several guests standing nearby. Then something unexpected happened. One of the senior house staff approached Naomi carrying a silver tray. Mr. Bennett, the estate's longtime head butler. He had worked for Arthur Whitmore for nearly 40 years. The elderly man stopped directly beside Naomi and lowered his head respectfully. Welcome home, Miss Carter, he said softly. The silence that followed seemed to freeze the entire ballroom. Vivian's face lost color almost instantly. Ethan stared at the butler in complete confusion. Naomi remained perfectly calm while accepting the champagne glass from the tray. Crystal reflected warm chandelier light across her fingers. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, Jonathan Hale quietly stepped through the entrance holding a thick black legal folder beneath his arm. The ballroom remained silent long after Jonathan Hale stepped through the entrance carrying the black legal folder beneath his arm. Even the violinists near the staircase had stopped playing. Guests stood frozen beside crystal glasses and untouched desserts while snow drifted slowly beyond the towering windows of the Whitmore estate. Vivian Whitmore recovered first, but only barely. Jonathan, she said sharply, forcing a smile that no longer reached her eyes. This is hardly the appropriate time for legal matters. Jonathan removed his gloves calmly. Actually, Vivian, this is precisely the appropriate time. Naomi stood quietly, near the center of the ballroom, one hand resting lightly against the stem of her champagne glass. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. If anything, she looked peaceful. And somehow, that unsettled Vivian more than any confrontation could have. Ethan glanced between them, confusion slowly tightening across his face. What is going on? Jonathan walked toward the grand staircase beneath the chandelier before turning to face the room. His voice carried easily through the silence polished by wealth and tension. Before his death, Arthur Whitmore created several legally binding trust protections concerning this estate and associated holdings. Vivian stepped forward immediately. This is not the place for this discussion. Jonathan ignored her completely. Those protections were activated approximately 9 weeks ago. Ethan frowned. Activated by what? Jonathan finally opened the folder. The sound of paper unfolding echoed softly through the ballroom. By the unlawful removal of Naomi Carter from the property, a visible ripple moved through the guests. Quiet whispers spread instantly between investors and board members standing near the fireplace. Vivian's expression hardened. She left voluntarily. Jonathan's eyes lifted calmly toward hers. That statement is contradicted by witness testimony from household staff, security footage, and legal correspondence sent to your office 48 hours later. Ethan's face slowly lost color. Naomi noticed his hands tighten at his sides. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely afraid. Jonathan continued reading. Per Arthur Whitmore's revised estate structure, full controlling ownership of the Whitmore residence and connected trust assets legally transferred to Miss Naomi Carter upon breach of protective occupancy conditions. The ballroom became completely motionless. Somewhere near the back of the room, a champagne glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered softly against the marble floor. Vivian stared at Jonathan as though she had stopped understanding the English language itself. That is impossible, she whispered. Jonathan calmly removed another document from the folder. Signed and notarized 3 years ago. Ethan stepped forward suddenly. My grandfather never told me any of this. Jonathan looked at him with something close to disappointment. Your grandfather spent years waiting for you to become the kind of man capable of deserving it. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Ethan looked toward Naomi then. Really looked at her for the first time in months. The woman standing beneath the chandeliers no longer resembled the exhausted mother left in the rain outside those same doors. She stood straight now, calm, untouchable. Naomi met his gaze without bitterness. That almost made it worse. Vivian's composure finally cracked. She manipulated him, she snapped. Arthur was old and emotional, and she took advantage of him. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. But before Jonathan could respond, another voice spoke first. That is not true. Everyone turned. Mr. Bennett stood near the staircase, hands folded neatly behind his back. The elderly butler looked directly at Vivian. Miss Carter was the only person who treated Mr. Whitmore like family during his illness. More silence. Heavy silence now. The kind that stripped status away from people one layer at a time. Jonathan closed the folder carefully. As of tonight, Naomi Carter possesses full legal authority over this property. Snow continued falling outside, while Naomi slowly set her untouched champagne glass onto a silver tray nearby. Her movements remained graceful, unhurried. Vivian looked suddenly smaller standing beneath the massive chandelier she once controlled so confidently. Then Naomi reached calmly into her purse and removed the old brass key Arthur left behind. The same worn key Vivian never knew existed. Naomi looked at Ethan one final time before speaking softly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. You threw me out of my own home. No one in the ballroom spoke after Naomi's words settled into the silence. Snow drifted quietly beyond the tall windows while chandelier light reflected across marble floors polished by decades of wealth and appearances. Vivian Whitmore stood perfectly still near the staircase, her face pale beneath layers of careful elegance. For the first time in her life, she looked like someone who understood what losing control felt like. Ethan lowered his eyes slowly. Naomi watched him for a moment, remembering the young man who once sat beside her on the floor of a tiny apartment eating takeout noodles from paper containers because they could not afford proper furniture yet. Back then, he used to dream out loud about building a future together. Somewhere along the way, ambition stopped sounding like hope and started sounding like fear. Jonathan Hale quietly handed several copies of the legal documents to board members standing nearby. Whispers moved across the ballroom in soft waves now. Investors avoiding eye contact with Vivian. Socialites pretending to study champagne glasses while listening carefully to every word. Naomi realized something strange then. The people who once intimidated her suddenly looked very small. Just expensive strangers standing inside a house built on somebody else's kindness. Vivian finally found her voice again. What exactly do you want? The question floated sharply through the ballroom. Naomi looked at her calmly. Nothing. Vivian blinked in confusion. You expect me to believe that? Naomi slowly slipped the brass key back into her purse. I did not come here for revenge. Ethan stepped closer then, guilt visible in every movement now. Naomi, I did not know. She met his eyes quietly. That is the problem, Ethan. You never wanted to know. The words landed gently, but they cut deeper than anger ever could. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, then stopped, because there was nothing left to defend. He remembered the rain that night, the sound of the front doors closing, Naomi standing outside holding their newborn twins while he remained frozen on the staircase beside his mother. Some failures stay with a man forever. Naomi turned away from him before he could speak again. Her attention shifted instead toward the musicians near the balcony who still stood uncertainly beside silent violins. "Please continue," she said softly. "Your music should not stop because of me." The violinists exchanged hesitant glances before slowly beginning again. Gentle notes floated back into the ballroom, awkward at first, then warm and steady. Naomi walked calmly across the marble floor while guests moved aside instinctively to let her pass. Not because she demanded it, because dignity has a way of creating space around itself. Mr. Bennet opened the tall terrace doors for her as she stepped outside into the cold December air. Snowflakes drifted softly across the estate grounds, settling against the black fabric of her coat. The gardens looked peaceful beneath the winter lights. Jonathan joined her a moment later, standing quietly beside her beneath the covered terrace. "You handled that exactly the way Arthur hoped you would," he said. Naomi looked out across the snow-covered property. "I almost lost myself trying to survive this family." Jonathan nodded slowly. "But you did not." Through the ballroom windows behind them, Naomi could still see Vivian standing motionless beneath the chandelier while guests avoided her gaze one conversation at a time. Power looked different now. Smaller. Fragile. Naomi rested her hands inside her coat pockets against the cold. Somewhere back in Hartford, her twins were sleeping safely beneath warm blankets in the apartment that had become more of a home than this mansion ever was. And suddenly, ownership no longer felt like the important thing. Peace did. After a long silence, Jonathan finally asked quietly, "What happens now?" Naomi watched snow settle across the stone fountain where she once stood crying in the dark. Then she smiled faintly. Not triumphant. Not cruel. Free. "Now," she said softly, "I raise my children somewhere love does not need permission to exist." Then she turned toward the terrace doors as the music continued behind the glass and walked back into the mansion she no longer needed to prove belonged to her.